Okay, so everyone, good morning. First of all, can you see my screen? I just want to make sure that you can see my screen.
Yes, it's visible.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so thank you so much everyone for joining with us today. So we are from PICO, we are Pence International Cooperation Office, and today we're going to have a webinar, and this is very special because we are going to talk about how we can use proper English in the academic and also work settings. In today's webinar, under the theme A Kickstart for Your International Journey, we hope that this webinar can help you if you want to prepare for your master degree, for example, for the college, or if you want to pursue or land a job in an international company. So hopefully this webinar is for you. Okay. So this is the agenda for today. And we're going to have the webinar session with Mr. Kevin Wong. And probably we're going to run earlier than the schedule. That is totally okay because we're going to have more time to discuss the topic. And we're also going to have Q&A session. So you can drop your questions in the Q&A slides. We're going to share the info where the link that you can drop your questions there. Okay, first of all, let me read you the ground rules. So during the sessions, you should mute your microphone. Please do not unmute because it will disturb the webinar. And then you can ask questions during the webinar by typing questions at the link as you can see on the screen. The committee will also share the information of the link in the chat box. So make sure you check the chat box as well. And then for the questions, I will read the questions and then it will be answered by Mr. Kevin in the Q&A session. However, you are also welcomed if you want to ask questions directly. Just raise your hand and I will call you to give your questions live. And lastly, for the e-certificate, so this certificate will be can be accessed at the end of webinar session. So make sure that you will join us until the end so you can have access to this certificate. Okay, so first of all, we're going to say thank you so much for our head of PEN's International Cooperation Office, Mr. Ivan Sarif, for making this webinar possible. We're hoping that this webinar will be very beneficial for everyone. Okay, so now let's meet the speaker. So our speaker for today's webinar is Mr. Kevin Wong. So he is a teacher and also curriculum developer in New York City. And he's now working as a secondary English teacher. He's also developing curriculum for the English department. And for your information, Mr. Kevin also had experience in Peace Corps Indonesia. So he's been in Indonesia for about 2 years. He's a trainer in secondary education English teacher and also coach debate team to a national second place. And also he taught 960 high school English learners using project learning. So it's so interesting to see his background and we can't wait to just go to the discussion. So do we have Mr. Kevin Wong here in the Zoom?
Yeah, hi, thank you. Do you want me to just go ahead and start sharing and then start talking?
Yes. Okay, so okay. Mr. Kevin Wong, time is yours.
Nope. Hi, good morning, everyone. So my name is Kevin Wong. I'm a teacher, as mentioned by Lena, that I'm a teacher here in New York City right now. I was originally born and raised in Las Vegas. And so basically my topics will cover a couple of different things as we go. One is primarily what it seems like, what studying in the US would look like, what the application process would be like, and if you were currently interested in exchange programs, things like that, how would you go about applying, especially with like differences in the cultural context what strategies might you want to employ. So I guess we'll go ahead and get started with the topics. So Lena, you're free to interrupt me if any questions come on, because I can't actually see the question on Slido right now. But moving on to the first thing I was asked to talk about, which is the idea about studying in the USA. I think that one thing, the primary thing that you're probably interested in is that the minimum requirement is learning English. And that's a general requirement for most universities that are accepting international students. So as part of your application process to any program, whether it be undergraduate or a graduate program, you're going to be asked to test your English ability with like a TEFL certification or something like that. So kind of like what would be your first step is to make sure that your English is sufficient to meet whatever requirement of the institutions that you're interested in. I think that it's actually fairly convenient to find participating institutions. I guess in this PowerPoint, I've included a lot of links, and you're free to grab this PowerPoint after the presentation as well. But basically, the first thing you really should do is to look up an institution that you're interested in. Graduate programs are offered all throughout the States. And so identifying one that interests you with the correct area of study is particularly important. And there are really two different visas that students usually come into America on. There's actually three. The first one is an academic visa, which basically it's the F1. What that's for is for students who are interested in extended, like a degree program, essentially. An M1 is basically a shorter visa where you're learning a specific vocational skill. So mostly those are non-degree seeking. I didn't include that here. I will talk about it a little bit more later, but you can also come into America with something called a J1 visa. And a J1 visa is specific for exchange programs with other countries that the United States have partnerships with. And you can look into the institution with essentially this link. If I click on it, it won't show you anything unless I reshare. So I'll just leave it at that for now. The second thing that you can do, actually, maybe I should do that. Let's do this real quick. I'm going to reshare so that I can open links. Okay, so I'll click it open so you can see kind of what it looks like, which I think is valuable. So this, can you see this website essentially?
Yes.
Okay. So basically you can search different schools and different institutions. Not every school has an international branch that accepts international students. They need a specific licensure to accept international students, but most schools do have that kind of program. So if you were to look at, for example, New York State, where I'm currently living, you can see that 474 institutions are available with that. So then you can look at the different schools to see their programs. Beyond that, we have a lot of partnerships with advising centers throughout Indonesia and throughout the world, actually, for students interested in coming to study. That's this site, which is educationus.state.gov. And spread throughout Indonesia or throughout the world, wherever you might be, you can actually identify institutions in your country that can help set you on the path of getting your visa to come to study. Lena, is there a question?
Yeah, so because we are from the vocational school, probably you can explain a little bit like the difference probably after this F1 and M1.
Yeah, so both visas it's just an application process, and you'll have to look up the requirements. I don't know them off the top of my head, but it requires being accepted into the institution first. The best way to learn about this is through our Department of State, which has academic centers throughout different countries. where you can go and talk to them about which visa might fit you better specifically. So for example, once I open up this website, I can find an advising center specifically to Indonesia. And these are run by the State Department, as far as I know. So for example, you can see Education USA. There are, I believe you're in Surabaya, so there is a branch in Surabaya. So you can go to here. They have hours. You can seek financial aid, you can seek advice. And if you wanted to study in America specifically, this is probably the best place to start, to contact this institution. And they're basically in charge of specifically helping you find the correct path to get you to the States. Oops. So the difference between the F1 and the M1 is basically that M1 doesn't come with a degree. So you're studying something for essentially a year, and that's basically the end of the education. So it's studying one specific skill. So for example, you might come to America to study one programming language or one type of field, and that has a close date. So an M1 basically says, hey, you come to America to study for specifically a year, this particular topic at this institution, and when you're done, you return back to your home. An F1 is an academic study, which means you finish a whole degree here, basically. That's the distinction as far as I know. But again, the best place to actually learn about this and be on track to come and study in America is probably contacting this advising center, which is more equipped to answer your specific questions than I am. Okay, moving on to the next piece. I get this question a lot about financing your studies. Students, even students that I have here who want to have family members, younger family members from their home countries study here, ask me this question about financial aid. The US government itself doesn't provide loans or grants or scholarships to international students. And there are a couple of ways you can find funding if that's what you really want. The first one is to obtain some kind of funding from your home country. From what I know, that there is some kind of funding available if you get into specific institutions in Indonesia. That was what I heard back when I was a volunteer in Indonesia, but I'm uncertain of the rules in your country. You would be more familiar than I. The second thing you can do is you can contact the admissions office at the target institution. What you find is that the universities themselves will offer scholarships based on need. So if you apply to a school and you get in, and one of the things is that you're an international student who needs financial assistance, you can talk to the administrative program about that issue. The other thing too is there are different scholarships specifically granted to international students, but you would have to kind of research them directly from host institutions. And those vary from institution to institution. So there's no like specific one that's around every year. But some schools have specific international study programs where they'll sponsor your visa and then bring you into their school. And usually that's some kind of like diversity program where you bring in your culture to teach to the rest of the students. And as part of that, you get an education here. Okay. And then the last way that you can kind of come study in America are through our government exchange programs. You can actually do those now while you're still doing potentially undergrad at your university, but there are also additional Fulbright scholarships that you can get afterward. Although Fulbright scholarships you can get to numerous countries, it's not just the United States, but most countries will have their State Department equivalent negotiate how many students are exchanged back and forth. So you can find out if you're interested in studying in America about those exchange programs as well. Applications to the programs, basically you'll need like translations of your transcripts, standardized test scores. Specifically for graduate programs, you'll need the GRE. For exchange programs, they each have their unique requirements. and then generally college application essays, resumes, and potentially interviews. Although I have found that interviews for graduate school really depends on what school that you go to. Some schools will just accept you without an interview. Some schools will request an interview. Looking just briefly at a couple of programs, besides the Fulbright, which is kind of our scholars and graduate school program, there are a couple of ways you can travel to the United States now if you wanted to apply to some of these. The Community College Initiative program basically partners different countries, Indonesia is one of them, with community colleges in the United States for specific fields. I think like there are some tech fields as well. And basically you come in for a vocational training of about a year. There's also the study of US Institutes for Student Leaders. That's a leadership program for essentially students in college. And you come, I think it's just 6 weeks. I don't know that number off the top of my head, but it's a couple of months where you specifically come to study monuments in the USA, kind of our history, and kind of return that to your country. And then the last program is the Global Undergraduate Exchange Program, UGrad. And similar to the Fulbright, it's basically an exchange program between many different countries all across the world. Not just the United States, but you could find a lot of participating countries to partner with and try to earn an opportunity to study there for a semester. But probably Lena could speak to this program a little bit better than I at this point. Working and living in the United States is kind of the second question that I was asked to talk on. So if studying is kind of the easiest way to come into the country originally, working in the United States is an additional challenge. Obviously, because each country has its own kind of industry protection mechanisms, and it makes it challenging for foreign workers to come to the United States, just like it would be difficult for a foreign worker from the United States to go to Indonesia, for example. But besides the exchange programs that we just talked about, Fulbright programs, et cetera, so there are a couple of different visas that students or workers can apply for, but really there are two ways of working in America that would make sense for, a college student who would be coming to this webinar. The first one is the H-1B visa for skilled workers. Basically, this is the most common way for workers to come to America outside of you having a specifically high qualification in a field that we don't have anyone to fill in. So beyond specific needs, which is kind of like a case-by-case basis, the H-1B visa is for skilled workers in general. And I think that there are about 60,000 or so people who are allowed into the country each year. You have to find an employer to sponsor you. Most of the big technology firms are the main sponsors for H-1B visas. So common names, Apple, Microsoft, Amazon. If you apply for a job at that institution, making sure to tell them your current status, and they decide to hire you, they will sponsor your visa. So they will tell you what to do from then. So your main job is to kind of apply for that position, and then your employer should do the rest in sponsoring your visa. If you're interested in long-term work, for example, the H-1B visa lasts for about 3 years. If you want to extend, you can extend an additional 3 years, so 6 years total. And obviously at that point, if you think that you would want to be a permanent resident in America and you've been working here continuously, you can also apply later to adjust your immigration status from a visa to a permanent resident if you decide to kind of want to live in America for ongoing. The only other real way to kind of work in the United States or to live in the United States, each year there's a diversity lottery. And to do it, you have to have the intent to kind of move to the United States. obviously, once you move to the United States, you can get work however you want, and you can also leave the country and return home and to visit, or you can leave the United States whenever you no longer want to be a resident there. But basically, it gives you the right to live in the United States. How it works is basically each year we allow 50,000 people from each region to come into the United States to live permanently. All you have to do is apply, and it's by complete lottery. So you do need to fill out the application, and there are some specific requirements. However, anyone essentially who is an adult can apply. And if you win the lottery, you and your significant other potentially can move to America to live and work. And you would get a legal permanent resident status with which you can use to both work in America, and also you can use it as your documentation to enter and leave the country, similar to a passport. Okay, so that's studying, living, and working in the United States. Do we have any questions on those ideas? Yeah, go ahead, Lena.
Okay, so there is a question about the diversity lottery. So how long usually it takes from applying to the permanent residence until they get, accepted?
Yeah, so the lottery is different than all of the other forms of incoming immigration. Right now, you would apply for 2023. So you would apply in 2022 for like a year and a half in the future. And if you're selected, 2023, you can come. And that's the nature of the lottery. Other forms of immigrating to the United States, outside of, I guess, marrying an American, like marriage is like the quickest way. Then you can apply for your closest family, which is your husband or wife, your children. I'm not sure if you can invite your parents anymore. Those rules change. That's like next fastest. That's also like a year and a half. And then any extended family. So if will take like 10, 20 years of waiting time. So for example, I was born in the United States, but my parents came from Hong Kong. And so when my parents first moved here, they applied for their brothers and sisters to also come to America, and they had to wait for 14 years. But if you win the lottery, you don't have to do that. You can just come the year that you've applied for, which is about like a year and a half in advance. Indonesia is a participating country in the lottery, so you can apply. Just to show you the link, I suppose. Basically, it's through the State Department. There's steps that you can walk through to apply. And you don't see the list of countries here, but you can trust me that Indonesia is on the list. I think that there were, I don't know, like 20,000 applicants last year from Indonesia. And Indonesia counts towards like one of the regions that gets 50,000 total people who can come. So there are interviews, there are qualifications, but the qualifications aren't anything like specific. I think you just have to have proof that you have like a high school education, for example. So there are some minimums, but you can check out those on your own. Okay. Any other questions about how to visit?
So far that was it. You can continue.
Okay. Great. So now the second piece is, let's say that you do decide to come to America and you find a route to come, whether through an exchange program, through a work program, through just deciding to study. To study here, which is like separate than work. Governments tend to want to protect workers and jobs, but study is kind of like, if the college has space for you and you have the funds, most colleges are willing to accept. So if you do end up in America, which I hope you do, there are a couple of challenges that I was asked to talk about. The first one is like accents and grammar. How much of that should we pay attention to? I think that number one, America is a very diverse country with very different kinds of people. For example, if you went to Germany, you would have 90% white Germans that you would see and work with on a daily basis. In America, a lot of people think about America as a white country with people of a certain color and race, but white Americans only take up about 58 to 60% of our population. So there's actually, and of those people who are white, they come from different European countries, so that the native population is actually quite small and shrinking as a percentage of the population. What that means is when I go around on my daily routine, I encounter many people with many different accents. None of that really matters. What matters is that you speak in a way that's comprehensible. If people understand you, your English is good enough. If people don't understand you, part of it could be grammar, part of it could be vocabulary, then some work needs to be done. So number one is just comprehensibility. Nobody speaks with perfect grammar. Most people speak with slang, and there are accents all throughout America. So on this idea of accents, almost always accents don't matter when you're speaking in English, so you don't have to be embarrassed. We're a country of many immigrants with many different sounding voices. And so you don't have to worry about that in most of the places that you'll go. And in fact, if you visit different areas of America, you'll hear that the accents are very different. Similarly with Indonesia, right? When you travel from one section to Indonesia, a Javanese accent would be very different than a Sudanese accent, for example. And you'll see that in America too. We are also a very large, diverse country. So major cities, I anticipate that most of the time, if you do come to America, you'll be in a major city. It's unlikely that you'll go into a more rural area. But in major cities, tons of foreigners. New York is a very international city. You can find an Indonesian restaurant if you really are missing food from home pretty easily here in New York, for example. And there are many different accents, many different people that you'll meet. As far as grammar goes, in spoken English, it doesn't really matter too much. Comprehensibility is the most important. Do people understand you? I think secondly, though, if you're doing formal academic work or doing written work for your employer, it is necessary for you to have like professional academic language. So grammar should be correct. You should be able to put together emails, for example. There are exceptions to this. So for example, if you're in a hyper-focused field like accounting, where you're mainly working on spreadsheets and numbers and you might not be writing paragraphs of analysis, that might be a situation where you don't need like the most formal of English. But I would say written English, definitely you would need a level of formal English, but there's a lot of leeway for grammatical errors in speaking. Okay. So those are some challenges. Actually, my specialization is in teaching students who are new immigrants to America. And I work primarily with people who have a very low level of language and try to build that language in them, similarly to what I did in Indonesia, but this time with incoming students. There's some easy strategies just to practice and build up your confidence. Confidence is really the number one thing. If you're shy and you're scared to try your language, it's very difficult to improve. Couple of strategies just as a language teacher myself. One, you can repeat lines from shows, songs, and streamers just to consume media in English. So if you have a show that you like watching in Indonesia, that comes from America, that comes from Korea. If you're watching Squid Game, which has been really popular recently, that's translated into many different languages. If you like the show, you can decide to start watching it in English. And that's a good way to practice your listening and also to start picking up phrases. Karaoke It's also something that where you can learn phrases in English from. The second is to start speaking English with your friends and to form partnerships. If you know that a couple of your friends have aspirations to go to an English-speaking country, even if it's not the United States, English is a really useful language to be able to speak. Form a group and just talk with them in English. So whenever you talk to this friend, no longer do you use so much Indonesian or Javanese. You just want to switch to English with that friend. I find that that increases comfort level with the language, right? A lot of speaking in English is about your comfort level with the words you know, not necessarily the words that you're trying to know. Another strategy that is really useful is when you are taking your courses, you can take an elective course or in English. So we're in the age of online classes. We're in the age of going to different institutions. So if you want to take a course in English, it's a very different experience than taking an English course. When you take an English course, the teacher teaches you vocabulary directly, but there isn't as much opportunity to practice. Taking a course in English means the teacher tries to teach you in English, and so your attempts to understand and participate in the language builds up those language skills actually faster than necessarily learning the language directly, because it forces you to speak and understand. Okay. Another good way to kind of learn speaking strategies is just to participate and chat in communities and forums online. You'll learn speaking phrases very quickly that way. So if you want to participate in discourse through social media, through forums, chat, that's also a good way to pick up some of the language. You can also practice some common phrases rather than words. So a lot of students want to study vocab, but vocab independently makes students constantly search for the right word, where practicing phrases helps you internalize syntax a lot faster. So my recommendation is to memorize short phrases that you want to say and then to use those. My last kind of piece of advice is talk to strangers who you'll never meet again and speak English with them. I think this is a really good strategy because a lot of times we're afraid to get embarrassed when we're with someone who we might see again, who we think, okay, maybe they will judge us. But from a language acquisition perspective, talking to strangers is really useful because you can repeat your beginner language. And if you make a mistake, you never have to see them again. So it's not a big deal. Knowing this, when I was trying to acquire Bahasa Indonesia and when I was doing my service, I talked to many random people with Indonesian, and that is how I was able to practice language. And then just overall, when you're in a speaking block, meaning you're trying to think of the right word or the right phrase, don't wait for the perfect word. Use the simple words you already know to make people understand you. That's most important. As I mentioned before, in most of your working context and your studying context, number one is comprehensibility. You don't need the perfect vocabulary word. You need people to understand you. And those people who don't care about English being perfect actually learn English faster or learn any language faster wherever you decide to go or study. Okay, any questions on strategies?
I guess you can continue. Yeah.
So the next piece that I was asked to talk about is the American academic and work settings. So what might be different in the United States compared to Indonesia? And culturally, obviously, you'll have a lot of differences. I think that if you come to work in America, you'll find that the work culture is very casual. people will dress and speak more freely than in many other places, including Indonesia, specifically in professional contexts. So for example, if you were to study, your professors may not necessarily wear a tie and a suit. They might come in just a t-shirt or sweater, depending on the specific institution you go to. And your boss might interact with you in a very friendly way rather than a privileged position, again, depending on the institution you're going to. And often workers in America are very friendly with their new colleagues very quickly. So it's always okay to talk and engage with new colleagues. And like with formal and informal cultures, the workplace is as diverse as Americans are. So really, depending on where you go to work, you'll get a very different experience here in America. I will say that when I was working in the Peace Corps in Indonesia, I was working with a young woman named Novi, and she was telling me about how she worked with both American volunteers and development workers. And before that, she worked with German development volunteer workers before working with us, the Americans. And what she said was that Americans are kind of positioned in the middle, whereas in Indonesia, like kind of the efficiency is medium. Americans are slightly more efficient and slightly more like timely, whereas like German workers were very on the spot. And so that may be a way to think about the spectrum of work experiences you might encounter. So on that topic, like one thing that is very, I don't know, it's definitely not uniquely American, but very different having worked in an Indonesian context versus American context is punctuality. In both the workplace and academia, you'll have scheduled meetings that have clear start times and end times, and those are not very flexible. So what does that mean? It means if your professor asks you for a meeting, like an advisory meeting, and they say, be here at 1:00, they will start at 1:00. And if they say at 1:15, we have to end the meeting, you will most likely end it at 1:15 because she will schedule another person next, right? And so there's no like jam karet in that sense where it's not as flexible. It's very, time is, the beginning and end time is mostly fixed. Obviously, there are exceptions and there's some flexibility, but it is not a large flexibility for professionals and for students. In the workplace, however, depending on what firm you work for, you can experience a wide range of different circumstances. For example, I work in the education field, and so everything is very punctual. Your start times and end times are very firm. I have a lot of my friends work for tech companies. Like my best friend works for Google, for example, and his work times are extremely flexible. And if he doesn't want to go into the work building that day, he just doesn't have to come in, and he doesn't have to report to a supervisor about it. It's more about you accomplishing your work than coming in at specific times of the day. So you don't have to go into an office at 8:00 and end at 2:00. You can say, hey, for the work I have today, I can come in at 10. I'll work at home for a few hours so that I can leave early. Workplaces have different amounts of flexibility depending on what firm you work for. I had another friend who worked for Zappos, which is a shoe company that's mostly internet based. And basically he comes in late in the day. He goes into work late in the day and he stays late. And it's like, I don't know how much background knowledge you have about kind of the American tech firm and the assumptions people have around American tech firms. But, you know, there's food given, there's like a gym at work, and workers have a lot of freedom to use those facilities. Again, depends on where you work. So that's that piece. Kind of the last piece that I think is really important if you come to the American academic or work setting is that in America, and I don't know if it's like more of a Western country thing, I haven't lived or worked in other Western countries, but individuality is like central to everything that permeates our culture. So people are essentially expected to participate and take initiative. And that's a constant, right? So oftentimes that means that you'll get very little instructions from your boss and you just have to kind of do it yourself. And that's even in a lot of structured environments where you're getting a lot of support. Normally your boss doesn't tell you, hey, do this, and then this, and then this, and then this. Like to be a good worker or a exceptional student, you're self-motivated, you're driven, and you're going above and beyond by yourself without kind of guidance. And that's like just a central value to Americans. And so we expect people to take initiative. So for example, if you're in a meeting with colleagues and your supervisor, you're expected to hop in and give your opinion, even when other people who are more senior than you are talking or giving their experience. You also should be pushing your own experiences. Another thing is directness is really important for Americans. And similarly to what I was telling you before about like Germany is a good example for me because I have cousins who live in Germany. And for them, like everything is super direct, right? In Indonesia, my experience when I'm talking to people is like conversation goes in a circle. So sometimes I'm talking for a long time, but I'm unclear what people want or need. In your work in academic settings, because time is stringent, it's better to just say it directly, right? You don't have to be super nice about it. You don't have to be angry about it. It's just tell me directly what you want, what you need. And a lot of supervisors and your professors will appreciate that clear communication. And even the partners that you collaborate with are going to appreciate that. Okay, have an eye on time. So any questions about the academic and work setting as far as a cultural standpoint? Going once, going twice. All right, moving on. So I think that most of the audience maybe isn't at the point where you would be applying for a work transfer, because I think most people want to be along in their field because the commitment to work in America is basically like very large. Whereas studying internationally could be a much smaller commitment and make more sense for people. So I do want to talk about college life in America, the application process. I actually know very little. I worked with some universities while I was in Indonesia, but I'm not actually very keen on the structure of how classes go. So maybe you can tell me about it so I can compare. But basically, college life in America, we use a semester system, which I think is also standard in Indonesia. Although one of the schools that I attended in California used a quarter system, which had 4 sections each year, one of the sections in the summer. But most colleges have a 2-semester system. Each semester, students are expected to take somewhere between 12 and 18 credits. Most programs will have you take about 15 credits each semester in order to finish the degree on time in 4 years. Most programs kind of follow that structure. If you're in a heavy science field, oftentimes you'll have to take more credits than 12. And if you want to take beyond 18 credits, usually that means you have to get special permission from the school. For example, when I was taking my classes, I usually took more than 18 each semester so that I could finish earlier, which you can also do, right? the faster you finish, the less money it will cost you, for example. Okay, so each class is worth generally 3 credits. So that translates to you only taking 4 to 6 classes each semester. So if you look on this small picture on the right-hand side of your screen, this is like a typical undergraduate schedule. I don't know what your schedules look like, but it sounds like you have many classes throughout the day, like from 8 to 2, for example. In America, most colleges let you choose your own schedule because colleges have a mix of young students and old students with different work schedules that they're trying to accommodate. So you can take night classes, you can take morning classes, you can take afternoon classes. But because you're only taking 4 to 6 classes each semester, and each class is only about 3 credit hours long, you only take classes for about 18 hours in a week. So let's look at the schedule, for example. This student on Mondays has class from 9 to 10, has a break, and then has class from 11 to 12. The rest of the day is free. They have this English class again on Wednesday for an hour and again on Friday for an hour. Math class they have from 11 to 12, but only 2 times a week. They have it for an hour and 50 minutes on Monday and an hour and 50 minutes on Wednesday. So they only have math twice a week. And so each day is going to look a little bit different. Usually your Mondays and Wednesdays look similar and your Tuesdays and Thursdays look similar. And I've studied at 4 different universities and all of them have the same structure of having similar classes on Mondays and Wednesdays, and then Tuesdays and Thursdays. So that's something you can consider, right? What does that mean for you, given that there's only 18 hours of classes and lecture? Most of the work that you do will be readings assigned to you that you kind of do in your own time. So like you anticipate for an additional, 20, 30 hours where you're just doing schoolwork, arranging for meetings with other classmates outside of class to do your work. And so it's just very different than classes. I guess asking Lena, are schedules in Indonesia different or similar to this?
I think it's a bit different because as you can see in your schedule, there are one course can be repeated like 3 times a week. So in Indonesia, we only have like 1 course per week, but for a super long time.
Okay, so you have like 1 class. How long does the class last?
So for 3 credits, usually we have 3 times 50 minutes, so right, around 2 hours and a half.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, so there's a lot of flexibility that students can use in their schedule. For example, for my education, most of it, I've tried to condense all of my classes. For example, if you were making this schedule, you could have, instead of choosing on Monday to have classes, you can put your English class on Tuesday as well, and your math class on Thursday, so that you would only have school 2 days a week, which is something that I did for much of my college experience so that I could work or do other experiences in between, which is something that you can consider. Classes are challenging, but if you're someone who loves school and is good at school, you can manipulate your schedule in a way that you can do more things. Because most introductory classes specifically have a lot of leeway for you to schedule them. Okay, so that's on kind of like college life from the scheduling standpoint. The other piece is if you do manage to do an exchange program or do decide to go to a different country to study, I think that self-advocacy, kind of building on individuality, is the best way to get a good college experience here in the States. There's very little official guidance given to students. Like I said, you could potentially have class for 2 hours a day and that's it, right? So the guidance can be very small for each semester. So it's easy to waste the opportunity kind of doing nothing. So you have to go seek out those opportunities, seek out networking opportunities. If, for example, you are interested in working in America, if there are college fairs, etc., you need to push yourself to go, even if you're stressed out, in order to make the most of those experiences. Because Americans value individuality, we expect people who need help to go find it rather than us asking students who need help. So even though there's usually a department for international students, I would say that the best way to get experience is to go and seek it. And you'll have to be brave with your English and with your experiences in order to do that. Usually, if you are an exchange student, you'll end up living on campus. If you live on campus, there are resident mentors that are usually assigned to your specific dormitory, and they will tell you things. If you don't live on campus, you're allotted even more kind of freedom, but the challenge is like finding your own housing usually makes that not particularly viable for someone outside of the country. So what ends up happening is, if you are a foreign exchange student who comes here, not an exchange student, if you're a foreigner who comes and studies in America, the first year you study, you'll usually live on campus. And that's my suggestion to you. You should live on campus. Otherwise, you're going to be like lost at what to do. If you feel very comfortable, then you can start looking for housing outside of campus. That could be a little bit cheaper, but it's very challenging to do. So I would suggest the first year being in a dormitory so you can talk with people. And then hopefully later on you can find better accommodations. And the last thing is, you should join student groups and clubs, as you are all doing here. It's a lot scarier once you're overseas. I can tell you, I lived overseas in a country as well and was very scared at first. But when you're abroad, the experience is what you make of it, right? So if you decide to sit in your dormitory and only study, then you could have probably done it online. So consider that as you study abroad, what to do to make the most of your experiences. So the other thing I wanted to talk about is like specifically master's programs, because I think a lot of you are considering studying as graduate students rather than maybe exchanging as undergraduate students. Personally, I think it's easier and less expensive to go and travel as an exchange student as an undergrad, because many countries have collaboration for stuff like that, whereas a graduate student will face significant competition for positions that are paid. My advice to you is, while you're still in an undergrad program, try to join an exchange program now. It's much easier to study abroad in this way. However, if you do want to study abroad for an MA program, I heard once before from a source that maybe is not reliable that the Indonesian government gives funding for students to go abroad to do this. But typically the programs take about 2 years to complete. As I mentioned to you, the requirements are really you take between 12 and 18 credits. So you could potentially finish a master's program in 1 year, because a master's program generally is 31 to 32 credits. So between 2 semesters, you could take 16 credits each semester and finish most of a master's program. But the workload is going to be pretty substantial. And for most like EDs, or like master program pluses almost. So rather than a Master of Arts, you have Masters of Sciences. Those usually take a little bit more credits. So it depends on what program you're studying. Again, typically the estimate is 2 years to complete, but the actual classes that you take, what's offered, you could have a differing result. When you're studying a specialized program, there's a lot less flexibility for your classes. So whereas an undergraduate might offer 5 sections of English, and so you could take English however you want, some classes are highly specialized to a topic, so it's only offered at one time for one day. And sometimes only every other semester or every year, that class is only offered once because the professor in charge of it is hyper specialized. And so in those cases, you have to find out what those classes are and make sure you study those classes. Make sure you make your schedule around those classes. There's also a lot more flexibility in the requirements of the program, though. So a lot of master's programs, they don't tell you exactly what class to take in what order. They give you X amount of classes that you have to take, and you're kind of constructing your own program with your advisor at the same time. So like for your master's degree, it's not like you have to take class A, class B, class C, class D, class E. It's like you have to take 5 classes in this area, 5 classes in this area, and then you form together like a thesis, which you then talk with your advisor about. Most classes don't have a literal thesis defense. I've been asked this before. Only doctoral programs have a thesis defense where like a bunch of professors ask you questions, but you'll have some kind of final project anyway, like some kind of long-term paper that you do have to write. It's specifically not a thesis defense. And mostly in graduate programs, you'll have smaller classes where you're more close to the professor. So in my undergraduate classes, I could be in auditoriums of anywhere between like 100 to 500 students. Whereas in my specialized classes, I can have maybe 12 to 20 classmates. So the more specialized, the less other people in your class. That's just the nature of it. So that's like a graduate program in a nutshell. A lot of flexibility on how you design your own program, but hyper specialized classes that you have to make sure that you keep an eye on to know if it's being offered. And you'll usually end up taking some classes that aren't as important to you, but hone in on those classes that are meaningful to you. Okay, applying to grad school. Common requirements, you need a bachelor's degree or an equivalent, an M1. There's an application fee to every school. If you can demonstrate that you have a financial issue paying an application fee, usually colleges will waive that fee for you. Standardized test scores might vary a little bit from school to school, but American schools generally ask you to take this test called the GRE for graduate school. Most of you are in undergraduate now, so you wouldn't take the undergraduate exam, which is the equivalent, which is called the SAT. But the GRE is heavy on English. There's a mathematics section, and then there's a like an argumentative writing section. So if you happen to be a former debater, you might be really good at the GRE. They also generally ask for letters of recommendation, which is pretty standard. And then there's 3 things that I'm going to go into a little more depth on with the remaining 15 minutes or so that I have, which are the application essays, your personal goal statements, resumes, and interviews, which I think are all slightly different than the Indonesian context. And I'll try to like include that. You can hop in with kind of questions about that. But basically, the process is go to the school's website, click on the application, follow the application, and it'll tell you the requirements to see if you can qualify. Okay, the first thing I actually want to talk about is resume writing. In Indonesia, a lot of times people ask me for my CV. In America, a CV is like something really long that is a kind of delicate history of everything you've done with like images on it, etc. Almost between a portfolio and a resume. Most of your applications, whether it's for work or for graduate school, will ask for resumes. And the main difference is brevity. It's just shorter. And most college students, like I tell most college students that I'm training, it just needs to be one page with no picture. It's just one page, what you've done. As much as possible, you should match your resume specifically to the employer or to the college that you're applying to. Look at what the goals of that college are, look at what program you're applying to, and try to pick out the skills that you have that match the institution that you're applying to, rather than having the same resume you send to everyone. That could make a small difference, and small differences determine whether or not you get into a competitive program. You should make it easy to understand. I've read applications myself, and you get very bored very quickly. And so if it's very difficult to read, the formatting is difficult, or the wording is not quite correct, or in a different format than I'm used to, it tires me out very quickly. So make it easy to understand, include the most relevant information. So not like something you did in elementary school, for example, not that you would do that. And then the formatting of a resume might be a little bit different in Indonesia. I'm not sure, but we always use the active verb as the first line of each bullet. So for example, I could say teaches language learners, rather than I am a language learner or I have taught. We get rid of the subject because it's just about you, just to make it faster. And so if you have questions about that, there are definitely infinite examples online to write resumes. And then, like I said, keep it to a page, because your college admissions officer is looking at a lot of applications already. So unless you have something really good that lasts multiple pages, one page is good enough. When I applied to Columbia graduate school, one page was my resume. So there you go. Okay, so any questions on resumes real quick? Once, twice. All right. Application advice for personal statements. Here's where a lot of culture comes in, and I don't know what personal statements in Indonesia are like, but as new kind of people entering a field or applying for college, this is very different. So your personal statement or your college essays, a couple of ideas. First, think about it this way. Your achievements are on your resume. Your story is in your personal statement. Your story is in your essay. So what is a narrative about you that you want to transmit to the admissions officer that isn't on your resume, right? So it's not a repetition of your resume. It's more the story behind who you are. I would say if you can find a unique story to build a narrative, Americans in colleges are very attracted to that. Like a struggle where you overcame a great challenge it's like a good story. And the more engaging your challenge is, the more engaging your story is going to be. So I encourage you to brainstorm the things that are most valuable to you. So for example, if you value hard work, or if you value always trying to obtain higher achievement, right? Then you can go and consider what experiences in your life have led you to that value, or how that value has served you in your life to do this. And you can do this basically one of two ways. You can either choose one big experience, one big journey that you tell a story for, or you can string together a series of small experiences that together build a story. My application letter to graduate school was more of the latter. So I told pieces of a story that each represented the values I developed over time about advocacy and human development and hope. And I strung together a story that I thought was really powerful about how I became an educator and how I became like an international minded development worker over time to kind of help me get into school. And so just find what's special to you And even if there's not anything special, you have to make it special. The personal statement is where people with weaker resumes can make up for it by being clever about the experiences that they do have. So extremely important, personal statements. Okay, and then the last piece is this. Interviews for graduate school is like not always required, but often required, especially for international students because they don't like know or see who you are. So I'm unsure what kind of questions they ask you for interviews in Indonesia, but my advice for you is to first be well researched about the institution you're applying to, right? So what do they care about? Show them that you've done research on their company or their school by telling them what they want to hear. But that's the part of the interview that's always kind of flat. But you want to also find a moment for authenticity. This is when you stop kind of pretending that you have done a lot, and then instead you take a step back and you try to be real with the interviewer so that they remember, hey, this person was really honest with me at the end. And I've done many interviews and I've coached students through many interviews. And I think that this strategy works best. Look professional, let them know that you've researched and prepared for the interview, because that's like going to leave a good impression. But then finally, try to find a moment to be honest and authentic so that they like you as a person and remember you. And usually that moment should come towards the end of the interview. Like, find a way to answer something honestly, be personable, tell a personal story. And if during your application writing process, you brainstorm a lot of your experiences, a lot of those interview questions will just be about your experiences. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and give you this resource real quick. Basically, this is a lesson that I give to my students who are applying for universities in America. I built it virtually last year, and so I'm going to let you go ahead and use it if you want to use it to practice. Basically, it discusses the American interview process. As you can see, you put in your name into this lesson, and it'll take you through some mock interview questions, and then I debrief the interview questions with you at the end. So that's available for you if you want to practice interviewing. These questions are taken from like very common interview applications that you would see if you were here in America. And so if you, for example, typed in your name, joined the lesson, basically you'll be able to see a video, well, a couple of slides, and then I will virtually drill you on these interview questions. So you can play the video. It'll drill you, and after each kind of question, you'll try to answer verbally, but you can summarize your responses on here. And then at the end, I debrief each of those questions so that you know how to best answer them, especially in the American context, which is a little bit more different. But in general, employ the strategies that I had mentioned, which is about being well-researched about the institution you're applying to, and then finding a moment to like make a human connection with the person. Interviews are notorious for being bad indicators of whether or not you're good at the job, but we still use them oftentimes anyways to field for candidates. So being prepared for questions, especially questions that will be in English and aggressive, will definitely help you. So you're free to use that lesson as you please. And so that brings us to the end of kind of the main presentation. I am impressed that I was able to talk for the entire hour. But now I'm going to open it for question and answer. So if you have any questions, I'll do my best to answer them about America, American context, traveling and studying here, and the different types of programs or visas that you might have. So we have about half an hour for Q&A if you would like to give me a question.
Okay, so thank you so much for the presentations. There are so many informations. So you guys can raise your hand if you want to ask question directly. I noticed several questions already dropped in the Slido. Maybe I will read some questions for you. So there's a question, So there's a question about the interview. So you already explained about how to do well in interview, but probably can you give us like an example of good and bad answers? Maybe like, for example, we want to show our achievements, for example, but we don't want to like show off or seems to be something like that.
Yeah, so it's tough because the most challenging aspect of communicating in a new language is capturing the nuance of how not to be bragging versus making sure that your achievements are known. I think as long as you keep a professional tone, that won't be an issue. An example of a good answer and a bad answer. Okay, I guess maybe the best way to do this is if we go back to, oops, not that. I want this. If we go back to this mock interview lesson, that is probably not correct. And we look at like question 3. For example, what are some role models that have inspired you? Could be a question, right? A bad answer is an answer where you're like too insincere. The answer is too obvious, right? So if I were to say something like, my role model is Barack Obama because he's a great leader that has helped unify people more than divide them, right? That answer is not particularly good, not because it's wrong or that I'm bragging, but because it's too generic and it will make the interviewer forget me if we were to have like, if he had only 3 spots, but 50 candidates, he would not remember the answer Barack Obama, right? Because it's too general. A good answer is either personal or special in some way. So you could say something to the effect of, like, I did this once and I got the job. So you can think about this. So I was trying to get hired for a teaching job. Actually, this might have been in my Peace Corps interview. They asked me for someone who has inspired you. And I told them the story of a student I had in Taekwondo who started off being very awkward in their movement. But because she continued to train so often, that she was able to compete at the state level and do very well. And then later on was able to compete with me on a demonstration team. And so something like that is unexpected, right? So a teacher whose inspiration and role model is a student is interesting compared to my role model is Barack Obama because he's so inspiring and he's a great speaker. Like, boring is dangerous because if it's competitive, you'll be forgotten. And that, I would say, is the worst answer you could give, because even if you're a little bit arrogant, Americans are going to sound way more arrogant than Indonesians anyway. So you probably aren't actually being arrogant when you tell your achievement to an American. They probably don't think you're being arrogant. Okay, next question.
Okay, so next question. I guess we have some people raising their hands. We have Haki. Are you there?
I don't actually think I need that. Stop that share.
Hi, Haki. You can ask your question directly. I don't think you have unmute yourself. Okay. Haki, are you still there? Or probably Hakim? Hakim also raising hands.
Hello,
Yeah.
hello.
Hi, I can hear you.
I'm just directly want to ask a question. You've been telling us about interview and some kind of essay writing, like personal statement or something. But I've seen several questions regarding to that, like this question: why we should choose you as the best candidate, for example. Can you give us some kind of the best answer to answer this question?
Why are you the best candidate? That is hard for me to answer because I don't know what you're applying to or what your skills are. The answer to that is usually you're the best candidate because, like, in a general sense, I have this value and this skill, and I've demonstrated it in this way, and it's unique, and that's why you should choose me. So I know nothing about you or like what your life or your challenges are. And so it would be difficult for me to tell you why you would be the best candidate. But if I were to talk to you for a long time, like I would be able to find a story that I think the person who is reading your application will love. So my background is in education, right? So for me, if you were working at a university and you're considering hiring me, why am I the best candidate? I think I'm the best candidate because I'm specifically driven to hope in situations where hope is costly and to be able to pay the price for that hope. And then I would tell you the story of, for example, teaching in a very low income area in New York City and having students who are subject to very difficult circumstances and what hope means to them, something like that. Because I would think that my specific experience working with disadvantaged youths in New York would give me uniqueness, and also that the value of a school or an institution is one of hope. And so I would try to answer it like that, but it takes a long time for me to think. It depends on the program that you're applying to. So for example, when I was applying to Columbia, the program I was applying to was International Education Development. It was about building education overseas. And so the example I used was my coaching experience at SMA Satu Trenggalek, and the students I met there and the teachers I met there, and that whole journey being so uncommon and really like learning so much from that. And that was my application essay and it worked. So the answer is, what have you done that's beautiful to you that you can explain in a way that's beautiful and demonstrate something that the institution you're applying to will care about? So I can't tell you what your best answer is, but you'll have to kind of explore by thinking through your life or going out and making that experience in order to write an application essay about it. I've also done that when I was younger. I was like, my application essay is really bad. I should go do something crazy. And so that's also an option. Good question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hakim, do you have any feedback or?
No. I get the point. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, for the next question from Haki, so his microphone is not working, so I will read his question. So basically he is asking, so when we arrive in America as a student using student visa, is there a way for us to have working experience, like having part-time job? Is it possible or is it not allowed using student visa?
It is. That's a good question. I'm not an immigration specialist, so I don't know. Internships are different than jobs. Internships, certainly you would be available to do it. Working a part-time job, maybe not. But I'm not an immigration specialist. I'm sorry, I don't have the answer to that. And I would be uncomfortable telling you incorrect information.
Okay, sure. Okay, then we'll go to the next question. So basically, there is question from anonymous. Basically, they're asking about so they're making an essay or personal statement, but do you have any like tips to correct their grammar or whatever? We have like Grammarly, for example, in an extension, but do you have another tools or like tips on how to make sure that our essay is good enough?
Tool. Wow. That's a great question. Outside of what you already know, there's no secret that I have. For many of my friends, I am the secret, right? Because I'm an English teacher. So a lot of my friends and a lot of people ask me to look over their essay for grammar corrections. So maybe you can find a teacher or a friend who has great English to edit your essay. And that's like number one. I find that even when I write an essay, I make a lot of mistakes, but I don't see them because I wrote it, so it sounds right in my head. And so I need to always give the essay to someone else to edit. That's like number one, but you probably already knew that, but there's no like secret that I know of that could help you automatically correct your essay. I think that if you're very nervous about having correct sentence structure, specifically syntax, what I would do is something called a syntactical imitation, meaning I will take an essay that I find online that I know is a good essay. I will look at that sentence and I'll replace words in that sentence to formulate my own, like, to make my own sentence, but with the same syntax as that one. This is actually a strategy I do teach. So for example, here, 1 second. So for example, if I go to like one place, am I sharing my screen right now? Did I?
I cannot see it.
Okay, how about now?
Yep, it works.
So a lot of like famous schools in America publish essays that are good, that they accepted. So that's a good place to like look at essays, right? I particularly like the John Hopkins essays. When my students want examples, I generally grab them. So essays that worked. These are essays that were accepted into the school, right? So you can go and look at the essays from this year that they accepted. And so, for example, I'll go here to this essay, right? It's called Lifelong Learning. And I'll take a sentence, very much like learning how to crochet. My journey in forging my own path and finding my passion was confusing, messy, and at times infuriating, right? So I'm not going to copy that sentence. That has nothing to do with me, right? But I could write something and imitate the syntax. So very much like teaching my students, my journey in coaching a debate team and finding my passion was difficult, ugly, and at times depressing, right? So I know that that grammar is correct because at every piece is in a winning essay. Does that make sense? And so I've taken that sentence. So the grammar is going to be perfect, but I've made the content of that sentence my own. And I use the format from an essay that was accepted in a very prestigious university already. So as a strategy, this one I really like, and I actually kind of do myself. So that's maybe something you can employ besides finding a friend to edit the essay for you, which I think is super important, and that's probably number one. Thank you for your question.
Okay, so basically we're looking for like a template to write our essays, right?
Yeah, using it to become a template.
Probably an extension, like there is a related question about that. So if we're like doing research about the essay and looking at other people's essay and then copying it and then like modify a little bit, will it be okay to like use that? Because we're going to use like a very common structure and then just modify a little bit.
I would not, it would be very difficult. So that's why I said a sentence syntax. So it's very unlikely you'll be able to copy a whole essay in the way that I just demonstrated. I'm talking about on the sentence level. That's what you should be looking at. The whole structure of your essay needs probably to be more of your own creation. So I wouldn't say it's like finding an essay to modify it slightly. It's like taking pieces of many essays to put together with new content in a new arrangement. So that is going to be basically a new essay. So yes, don't submit someone else's essay with minor changes.
Okay, cool. So there's another question. So you've been to Indonesia. What are the challenges that you see in Indonesian students that make them difficult to like speak or write in English? Maybe you can share your experience.
The number one difficulty is, I think that, well, there's two difficulties because there's two different kinds of students. I think the first kind of student is obviously the kind of learner I am, which is, I think I'm a very good student and I study very hard and work very hard. So when I am asked to talk to someone, I want it to be perfect. I want to have the perfect word. I want to have the perfect grammar. And if it's not perfect, I don't want to say anything. I want to go home and study again and then try again tomorrow, right? But that's a bad way to learn language, because if you model language learning off traditional models of language acquisition, so if you think about a child learning a new language, they're constantly making mistakes. It's just that they're communicating it however they can, and they get feedback from society, right? And so that's like the number one challenge, not necessarily for Indonesian students, but for like all students. It's getting over the fear of being wrong and doing your best with the words you know. That's number one. If I think Indonesian students specifically is for, as a teacher, and probably if I were employing Indonesian people as a boss, I think that the biggest challenge is students will not pretend, but they'll nod and pretend like they know what I'm talking about when they don't. And this is what I was talking about, like being direct in America. If you don't understand, you need to tell your teacher you don't understand. You need to tell your boss you don't understand. If you like smile and nod and then you don't know what to do, so you don't do it, that is very bad. And it becomes very difficult to teach because I don't know like what you know until it's like the time to test you. And that's usually like late, right? So I think like two things. One is just overcoming the fear of being wrong, using the language that you have in kind of like a desperate way. And then the second piece is like not pretending. I don't think my students are like lying to me that they want to know, but like I'm talking and they just want to nod and make me feel comfortable. Like, oh yeah, they're listening. But I need like teachers and bosses need you to be clear when you are not understanding the message. And then they can give you feedback. Hey, like this is wrong, or we can fix this, or I can give you this accommodation. Yeah, thank you for that question.
Okay, thank you for the answers. Probably that's a bit challenging for us, the Indonesian. Okay, we'll try our best to be more direct. Okay, so there's another question from Maliki. So Maliki, do you want to ask question directly? Okay, I don't think, okay, so then I will read his question. So he's asking for the lab on university, can we use it freely, or do we have to like make some permission or appointment, something like that?
Wait, say that one more time. What was the question?
For the lab, like laboratory, probably like in engineering major,
Yeah.
is it free for students to come in any time, or do they have to make permission or assign about?
Yeah, so like depending on the facility at a school, you might have to rent or check out that facility, but most are included in your tuition and fees. It's very rare that there are additional fees beyond the class fees you pay at the beginning of your school year that are like separate so that you can use a lab. Like you either have access to it or you do not. There's no like in between. Also, I did want to say, like with being direct, when I was in Indonesia, I found it very hard to be indirect and to be less rude. So it's like, it's just like a cultural thing. Be comfortable with it. You're in a different place. Talk with strangers and practice so that you don't have to see them ever again, right? Okay. Yeah. So the answer to that other question was given. Okay.
Okay, great. Now we have another question from Dipyo. He's asking about changing major. So for example, like he's now studying engineering and then he planned to like go for, let's say, business or management. Is there any like lower possibility, or, you know, what are the chances to get accepted?
Okay, so I can answer this many ways. I have a lot of experience with this. Number one is, yes, you can definitely change your major. One strategy that students often employ is if you want to go to a prestigious university, but you're not, this is for undergrad only, this is not for a graduate program. You can change your major when you're an undergraduate. So you can go into an easier program and then prove yourself in the early years and then transfer into a more prestigious program because they already know you, right? That's very common in an undergraduate program. In a graduate program, because it's hyper specialized, like I was saying, like you're studying something that most people don't know anything about, right? You have to essentially reapply to the university fresh. So, and it also depends on like how big the change is. So for example, like in my Columbia degree, I could change a little bit of the major from a focus on international development to economics in the educational space without but that doesn't change the name of my degree. That only changes my specialty in the degree. And so push that aside, if I wanted to go study like something else that's also a graduate degree, that is not something you can do with a graduate program. So that's the answer to that question. You can still make modifications, but for graduate school, you cannot. And for undergraduate school, it's very easy. Although you may lose your scholarship if you decide to leave the program and you have a program-specific scholarship. I have experience with this. Your parents will not be happy with you. Okay, continue. All right, good question, thank you.
Okay, I thought you will go further with your experience.
They don't need to hear my life story. I got 10 minutes left.
Okay, so we have some people raising hands. We have Naufal. Hi, Naufal. Do you have any questions?
Yes, I think. Yes. So good morning. And
Thank you.
so actually I have two questions, and it's all about the interview. So let's move on to the question. The first one is that if we wanted to pass this an interview, and we have to, elaborate the story pretty great, like in a really great technique. But do we have to elaborate the story like dramatically, or maybe is there any alternatives or another techniques that could work in this interview? And then the second thing is that about intonation, does intonation really important both in the speaking English or in the in this interview section? I think that's for my question.
Yeah, so to your first question about drama or like enthusiasm, an alternative strategy is being honest and authentic, right? Dramatic implies that you're doing some kind of acting that you don't feel, whereas authenticity implies that you're just making a connection by being a real person with the person who's interviewing you. I think that actually the second strategy, being honest and authentic, is more powerful because it speaks more to who you are and that you can be trusted rather than you're an actor and maybe I don't trust you. Because an interview is not about your abilities as much as it is about your personability. As to your second question about intonation, I mean, intonation is always really important. Knowing whether to emphasize a point with just the tone of your voice is just a product of interviewing a lot. I don't know if there is a place where you could get a lot of English interviewing experience, but you'll get feedback from people's faces if you talk and you do a couple of interviews. You definitely have these in Indonesia, but there are like job fairs and college fairs in the United States, for example. Maybe like right now you can find a virtual one and try to attend, where you kind of stand in line and you talk to potential employers or you talk to potential schools, and you just talk to them and they interview you like on the spot, basically. And you'll find that the more you do it, the more experience you'll have with intonation. So if you wanted to get together and do like a mock English interview session with a list of interview questions that you find, that might be the best way to learn whether or not intonation is effective. But intonation is a skill. You should have it. I don't think it's particularly different from intonation in Bahasa. Like I said, I coached debate in Indonesia, and I don't think like intonation is weird across languages. If it's important, you'll emphasize it, right? But for your dramatics question, I think that's a good question, and that might be a cultural question. People interviewing in America prefer honesty and seeming like a real person over your achievements and like acting like you're super like cool when you're not. Okay, thank you for the question. It was a great one.
Okay, so Novel, do you have any feedback?
Yeah, I think not, because it's pretty clear. Thank you so much for the answer.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, so do we have any more questions? So I noticed previously Hakim raising hands. Okay, Hakim, are you there?
Yes. Okay. I have a question, but it's a little bit asking for your personal opinion. So I think you already know that in Indonesia, the salary for the teacher, especially when they are still, how to say that, a honor teacher, the salary is a bit below average compared to the other country salary for the teacher. So, but lately they demand higher salary, and my question is, what do you think when the teacher who's supposed to be sincerely teaching their student without demanding high salary or money from their job, demand what is that increasing number of salary.
Your
That's my
question,
question. You get my point.
I'm a little bit confused about your question. Your question is, how do I feel about an
Uh,
underpaid teacher demanding a higher salary?
yes, because I just listened to you in your previous talk. You say that I don't know. What I get is that as a teacher, you have to be like sincerely teaching your student without uh I don't know demand high salary like that.
Even without high salary.
Yes.
My personal opinion is this. If you want to do charity, you should find an opportunity in your life to devote to charity. And if you want to work and you want your work to be appreciated, it's okay to demand that when that's what you want to do. That's my personal opinion, and that's how I lived my life, right? I volunteered overseas in Indonesia because I wanted to help people and represent the good side of America. And that was volunteering, right? That was there's no salary, but it was like the happiest I've ever taught. And now I'm in New York City teaching, where of public teachers in America, New York has the highest average salary. And in some ways, I decided to move to New York because I needed a salary after not having one for a long time. So I think it's acceptable to demand a salary for work if your work is good. I am in support of that. Especially if you're a good teacher, you should be compensated as a good teacher. But I also think on a personal level, if I want to do good work in the world and volunteer my time, I will do that without pay. And that's my expectation. And I do that now. I volunteer as well to help students. But for example, here, I'm not compensated to take students to tournaments, but I do it anyway, right? It's just, you just have to keep those parts of your life separate. And when you come to America, one conversation that you will have is, what are the boundaries in the workplace? What divides work from charity? What divides work from friendship? Because you'll be friendly with your colleagues and your bosses. And so you have to decide where that line is. And then that's something that you should protect. So that's my advice to you about teacher salary. I think it's definitely acceptable. There were just 2-3 years ago, there were a bunch of teacher strikes across America in demand for higher pay because teachers are underpaid given their level of education compared to other occupations. And I think that's fair. I also think it's fair if employers are like, well, we don't appreciate you, so we don't want to hire you. And so then teachers leave that state for other states. And that's just how, the labor market works in a capitalist society in America. All right, cool question. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for the answer.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, so that's actually the last question we have in the Q&A session. So probably for the last thing, do you have any advices for us, for those who want to pursue a job in the US or probably to continue their study? Do you have any advice for us?
I guess my advice is to decide how long you're willing to commit to be away from home. If the answer is a very long time, it will change how you behave considerably compared to if you think, I want just an experience overseas, because those are two different people, right? If you want an experience overseas, and then maybe later on decide whether or not you want to live somewhere else for a long time, I would recommend like an exchange program And that's what those are for. That's why we have them. If you, for some reason, think like you're mismatched with where you are and you want to live in America or any other country, the path that you must pursue is very different and potentially more difficult. So you would maybe try to apply for permanent status in the lottery. You might try to apply, even invest money into applying for jobs at big tech companies in the United States, or look into what countries have like a special relationship to hire Indonesian workers. But those are two different people. So I'll give you an example. For me, I did not want to leave my home country forever, but I also wanted to experience working elsewhere. And so volunteering helped match that with the State Department, because I knew it was a 2-year commitment that I could extend to 3, which I did. I like extended it to 3, but then I would go home, which is different than, you know, working in another country forever. So think about it, because if you're not sure about it and an interviewer asks you, why do you want this job in America? And your answer is like, oh, I just want to see what it's like in America. That's the wrong answer, right? So explore your own reasons first. And that would be my advice.
Okay, thank you so much for the advice. And now I think we're already at the end of the session. So I'm going to share you guys the exit ticket. And after that, we're going to have the virtual photo session with Mr. Kevin too, of course. But first, yeah, let me share the link for your certificate.
I'm sorry, what should I be doing?
We're going to have virtual photo session after this, but I will share the exit ticket first. Yeah.
Gotcha. Photo session.
Can you guys see my screen?
So I have a couple of links on my PowerPoint. Do you want me to share that as well with everyone?
Yes, of course. Yeah. If you're okay to share your presentation, that would be great.
Yeah, there's nothing unshareable in it. I'll delete my picture, I guess.
Perfect.
Okay.
So guys, make sure you make sure you screenshot or scan directly so you can get your e-certificate there. Okay, lastly, virtual photo session. So please open your camera, everyone. I'll stop sharing. We're going to have a virtual photo session after this, but I will share.
And I just put the PowerPoint up in chat. So if you want to download it, there are those links and also those interview practice questions on that virtual lesson that you're free to use. It's only like 5 minutes long, but best of luck to all of you.
Sure. Anyway, do we have Yopi here or Alfian? We need your help for the virtual photo session.
I went to let's turn on the kamera. Oke, kita tunggu untuk semuanya menyalakan kameranya.
Okay. So please open your camera, everyone, so we can cover all of the participants here. We have 3 slides gallery in Zoom. So Alfian, would you please help us to count?
Oke, cukup banyak. Saya hitung. Oke, ini ada yang open cam. Oke, 3, 2, 1. Oke, again. 3, 2, 1. Oke, change photo style. Oke, ubah gaya fotonya. Kita akan mulai hitung dari 3. Oke, 3, 2, 1. Oke, thank you very much. Oke, sesi yang foto is ended. Kembaliin ke moderator.
Okay, thank you so much, Alfian. And lastly, we would like to say thank you so much for Mr. Kevin, who have been, willing to be our speaker today. There are a lot of lessons for us, and hopefully, everyone here who are willing to go abroad, either for exchange or for job, hopefully you guys can have it in the future. So yeah, that's it for today. Thank you so much for participating. See you guys in the next meeting. Bye bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.